door clicked once. Clean, final. I stood still, the towel damp against my shoulders, feet pressed flat against cold tile. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he'd laugh, come back, say he was joking. But he didn't. "Next time, think before wasting hot water," Jacob said through the door. Then nothing. Just the sound of his footsteps retreating down the hall. I waited. First 10 minutes, then 20. Still nothing. I turned the knob slowly, as if that would make a difference. It didn't budge. The bathroom wasn't large, just enough room to turn around without hitting your elbow. I sat on the edge of the tub, my skin starting to chill. The towel didn't help much. I could hear the faint hum of the television, dishes clinking, laughter, his, hers. I thought of calling out, but something in me resisted. I knew that if I knocked, if I begged, it would change something permanent between us, something I wouldn't get back. So I stayed quiet. My stomach growled just before dusk. I cupped water from the sink with both hands, swallowing it slowly. I counted the hours by the way the light shifted under the door. The bathroom had no windows, just stale air and the steady drip from the faucet. I wrapped the towel tighter and curled up on the mat. I didn't sleep. Not really. I dozed in minutes, waking with every creak in the pipes. Every sound on the other side of the door reminded me they were living their lives. Dinner, a show, maybe wine. And I was in here. I had raised that boy, fed him, bathed him, held him through fevers and breakups and graduation speeches. Now I was a locked door away from being forgotten. I didn't cry, not that night. But when morning came and the door was still shut, I looked down at my bare, wrinkled feet and whispered to myself, "This isn't about water." It never was. The ache in my back pulsed through the second night, sharper than I remembered from years past. I shifted against the tiles, letting the cold sink deeper into my bones. And still he didn't come. I thought of St. Mary's, the overnight shifts that blurred into each other. I used to come home with bruises on my arms and dried blood under my nails, none of it mine. Men twice my size would scream at me while I stitched them up. I never flinched. I'd shower off the sweat, heat a can of soup, and still make it in time to iron Jacob's school shirts. When his father died, I learned what silence really sounded like in a house. No keys jingling at the door, no late-night jokes over dinner. Just me and a boy, with eyes too old for his age. From that moment on, I promised myself he'd never feel the loneliness I did. I was in every bleacher seat, every spelling bee. I brought home half-melted ice cream sandwiches after work and clapped louder than anyone when he crossed a stage. I made sure his fridge was full when he left for college. I made sure his tuition checks cleared before the deadlines. And when he got married, I handed him the keys to this house like it was a crown, my wedding gift, my blessing. "It's yours now," I told him, smiling already, picturing grandbabies and Sunday dinners. But I never gave him the deed. I told him it was just a formality, that paperwork could wait. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. Because somewhere buried beneath all the trust and sacrifice, a part of me still believed it might be wise to keep one door unlocked. Just one. By the second morning, that part of me was no longer buried. It was standing fully awake, listening to the hallway for footsteps that never came. The house I gave him wrapped around me like a cell. I was still waiting to be let out when the memory of that deed rose quietly to the surface. After the wedding, I didn't want to be in the way. I told them I'd take the small room at the back of the house, the one near the laundry machines. It didn't have much light, and the ceiling fan rattled when it spun, but I made it mine. I brought in my old armchair, the one with the loose stitching along the right arm. I even hung up the photo of Jacob when he was 5, holding a frog and smiling like he'd caught the moon. I didn't ask for help with anything. I cooked my own meals, cleaned my own room, washed my own clothes. I paid for every grocery I used, right down to the salt. The first time his wife wrinkled her nose and said, "That onion smell just sticks to everything," I apologized. I kept my head down and promised to use less next time. The second time it was the TV. "It echoes down the hall," she said. "I can hear it in the bedroom." I was watching an old detective show on low volume. Still, I turned it off before the credits rolled. By the fifth time, when she pointed out the extra towels I'd left in the dryer and how they threw off her system, I didn't respond. I had started keeping a notebook of all the things I'd changed about myself in that house. No onions, no TV after 9, no humming when I folded clothes. I used to hum without thinking, just quiet little tunes my mother taught me when I was a girl. Now the silence felt like part of the walls. Sometimes when I opened the refrigerator and saw their things labeled in neat black marker, I felt like a guest who had stayed too long. Jacob never said anything cruel. Not directly. But he didn't stop her either. And that was its own kind of answer. I told myself it was just tension. Newlyweds. Maybe they needed space. So I gave it. I shrank. I stepped around them. But the more space I gave, the less I seemed to exist. By the second night, the bathroom felt colder than the tile beneath me. The air had gone still heavy with the smell of damp towels and cleaning powder. I wrapped myself in a hand towel like it could fool my body into thinking it was a blanket. It didn't. I could hear them in the living room. Jacob's laughter bright and careless, his wife's softer giggle following after. They were watching something on TV. A comedy, maybe. Every burst of laughter pressed harder against the silence on my side of the door. The first day, I'd told myself this was a mistake, that he'd come back once he'd cooled off. The second day taught me better. This wasn't about cooling down. It was about control, about reminding me whose house this was now. I counted the hours by sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the low whir of the dishwasher starting its cycle, the pipes sighing when someone used the sink in the kitchen. Every noise became a clock. Every pause between them felt like a year. I drank from the faucet to keep the dryness out of my throat. The water had a metallic taste, but it was cold and real. I sat with my knees tucked under my chin, tracing the tiny cracks in the tile grout with my finger until my vision blurred. I didn't cry. There wasn't room for that in me anymore. Somewhere between the first night and the second, the tears dried up. All that was left was the quiet realization that I had raised a man capable of locking his mother in a room and sleeping soundly afterward. In the dark, I whispered it to myself. This isn't a fight. This is punishment. And like every punishment I'd ever survived in life, I knew one thing: it would end. When it did, I wouldn't forget what it taught me. I would remember every sound, every hour, every small humiliation. I would remember it the way you remember pain, as a warning. The third morning came with a soft click. The same sound as before, but this time it opened. I didn't move at first. I waited, unsure if I'd imagined it, if my mind had played a trick after too many hours in the dark. But then I heard his footsteps, the way he shifted his weight in the hallway. The door creaked inward, and Jacob stood there, not looking at me. "Don't do it again," he muttered like I was a child who'd forgotten to turn off the lights. No apology. No question of whether I was hungry or if I'd slept. Just those words tossed out like crumbs. He turned away before I could speak. Not that I intended to. I stood slowly, legs trembling, the towel still clinging to my shoulders. I stepped past him, past the hallway, past the kitchen, where the sink was full of last night's dishes. He didn't follow. He didn't ask where I was going. I closed the door to my room and sat on the bed, hands resting in my lap. My body ached, but it was nothing compared to the weight inside my chest. Around noon, I reached into the drawer beneath my sweaters and pulled out the small tin box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, the key still shined dull from time, but solid in my hand. I crossed the room, opened the closet, and unlocked the old safe tucked behind the winter coats. It creaked as it opened, and there they were. The deed to the house, the file from the bank, the passbook for the emergency account I'd opened in my maiden name years ago, tucked behind old medical receipts. My name was still printed clearly on every page. I ran my fingers over the paper, slowly letting the memory of each document settle in. I had built this life for him, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, but I had never truly given it all away. Not yet. I closed the safe, turned the key, and placed it gently into my pocket. I said nothing that afternoon. Not to Jacob, not to his wife, not even to myself. I moved the way I always did, quietly, deliberately invisible around corners. When Jacob asked if I could pick up more detergent from the store, I said, sure. When his wife muttered about electricity costs, I nodded and flicked off the hallway light. I played the part. Quiet, polite, predictable. At dinner, I asked how work was. Jacob complained about bills. He said interest rates were squeezing them, said they might have to delay the kitchen remodel. I chewed my food, slowly nodded at the right moments, and kept my eyes on my plate. That night, when the house went still, and the only light came from the microwave clock blinking blue in the dark, I opened my notebook. I wrote 3 things: lawyer, quiet buyer, one-way ticket. The list sat in front of me like a doorway. In the morning, I called Lenora Duval. We hadn't spoken in over a decade, not since the last time a nurse from our board retired and we all met for brunch. I didn't say much on the phone, just asked if she still handled private property sales. She said yes. Her voice hadn't changed. I need something quiet, I told her. Quick, but legal. She didn't ask why, just told me to bring my documents to her office the next afternoon. I told her I'd be there. The next step was to check the account. It was still active, still untouched. I made a second list. This one I didn't write down. I kept it in my head. The day I'd leave, the bag I'd pack, the country I'd choose. Every night, I added a little more to the plan, moved with a little more care, smiled just enough to keep their attention elsewhere. I wasn't running. Not yet. I was preparing to disappear. Quietly. Completely. And when I did, I'd leave no space behind for them to fill. Lenora called 3 days after our meeting. The buyers were ready. Cash deal. No listings. No signs. Just signatures. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. Quiet, fast, untraceable. I thanked her calm as ever and hung up the phone with both hands on the receiver like it might slip away if I didn't hold tight. That night, I opened a new bank account under my full maiden name. I transferred a small test deposit, just enough to be sure the wiring system worked. It cleared the next morning. No alerts, no questions. I retrieved my passport from behind the stack of old recipe books I kept on the top shelf, ones I hadn't opened in years. The corners were dusty, but the document inside was crisp, untouched. I checked the expiration date. Still valid. The suitcase came down from the attic the same night. I waited until the house was asleep. I moved slowly. No lights. No drawers left ajar. One small bag. I wouldn't need much. I folded a few shirts, 2 pairs of pants, underthings, the cardigan I wore every fall. I laid each piece flat, careful not to wrinkle. Down the hallway, I heard Jacob's voice. He wasn't whispering. Once she's gone, he said, we'll finally redo the kitchen. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. I've been waiting on that tile since last year. I held the blouse in my hands a little longer before folding it. I didn't feel hurt anymore. Not surprised. Just clear. Every movement I made after that was deliberate. I cleaned the bathroom like it wasn't mine, cooked less, bought groceries I could finish within a week. I stopped using their fridge space altogether. In the evenings, I sat by the window and watched the neighbors come and go. No one noticed anything different, and that was the point. The fewer ripples I left, the harder I'd be to follow. 3 days before closing, I woke before the sun. The house was still the air cool. I slipped on my shoes and opened my bedroom door without a sound. The hallway creaked the way it always had, and I didn't flinch. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting my hand skim along the door frames, each one painted by me in a spring 10 years ago. I remembered the color eggshell white. I'd done 2 coats because Jacob wanted it extra clean looking. In the living room, I paused near the window. The ledge had once been splintered by a summer storm. I'd sanded it down myself, sealed it with oil, and let it dry overnight with a fan pointing at it. No one ever noticed, but it never cracked again. I ran my palm across it, feeling for the groove I'd left behind, the tiniest dip where I'd pressed too hard with the sander. Still there. In the kitchen, I stared at the counters I scrubbed clean after every holiday meal. The light switch plates I replaced when the old ones yellowed. The baseboards I dusted even when no one asked me to. Everything they claimed as theirs, every corner they planned to remodel, was built on my labor, my decisions, my hands. I took nothing with me from that walk. No photos, no keepsakes. Just a memory of what it was before it became a place I wasn't allowed to exist in. By noon, I was sitting across from Lenora in her office. The keys sat between us on the desk. "He doesn't know," she asked. I shook my head. "He won't until I'm gone." She nodded, slid the envelope toward her drawer, and clicked it shut. "It's done," she said. I left the office with empty hands and a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. The deed was signed. The buyers were scheduled. All that remained was the leaving. The sky was still dark when I opened my eyes. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd spent the night sitting upright in the chair by the window, listening to the rhythm of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Every sound felt like it was counting down. I dressed quietly, folded the blanket on my bed, and zipped the small suitcase I'd packed days earlier. Inside were only the essentials papers: passport, the cardigan from my wedding anniversary, and a photograph of Jacob as a boy holding a wooden airplane. That was all I wanted to take. The rest could stay. The house was silent. I moved down the hall, careful where the floorboards creaked. His door was closed. I could hear the faint rumble of his snore. I wondered if he'd ever wake to the sound of his own life shifting beneath him. At the front door, I paused. The keys were gone already in Lenora's drawer, but I reached for the handle the way I always had, palm resting there a moment longer than necessary. I didn't look back. Outside, the air was heavy and cool. The taxi's headlights cut a pale path down the street. The driver stepped out to take my suitcase, and I nodded, slipping into the back seat. As the car rolled away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind a row of oaks. I thought of all the mornings I'd spent there, baking bread, ironing uniforms, listening for his footsteps. I thought of the 2 days behind that bathroom door. Then I stopped thinking altogether. At the airport, I moved quickly. Ticket, passport, security line. Routine things for a woman who had spent her life planning for others. The sun was just rising when I boarded. Through the small oval window, the world below turned gold. Somewhere back in Savannah, the movers would be arriving. And by the time Jacob woke, he'd find a house that no longer belonged to him. The first morning in the cottage, I woke to the sound of gulls. The window was cracked open, and the breeze carried the scent of salt and damp stone. I lay still for a while, letting the quiet settle into me. It wasn't the silence of tension or control, it was just silence. I took a long shower. Not rushed, not watched. I let the water run as long as I wanted until steam filled the room and the mirror fogged over. No one knocked. No one shouted through the door. The kitchen was narrow but bright. I made toast and drank my tea while the light shifted across the tiled floor. I ate when I felt like it. I left the dishes in the sink. Nothing happened. No one checked the thermostat. No one monitored the lights. I turned on every lamp in the cottage that evening just because I could. I brewed tea at midnight. I read by the window with the sea murmuring outside like an old friend. The cottage wasn't new, but it was mine. There were no photos on the walls yet, no plans for where anything should go. I liked it that way. I liked not being part of someone else's system. Sometimes I thought about the old house, the sound the back door made when it stuck in the heat, the creak in the floor outside my room, the drawer that never closed properly. I thought of those things the way you remember a place you once passed through, not a place you long to return to. I didn't miss Jacob. I didn't check for calls. I didn't wonder if he was looking for me because I knew he wasn't, and that truth didn't sting, it freed me. Here, the windows stayed open as long as I wanted. The waves came and went. The gulls called across the sky without needing answers, and I sat in the quiet, finally unaccounted for.